Finally, we have the industry veteran, known to all of us, Julian Bevis, Non-Executive Director, SAGT, who will speak to us about the ship size and future ports. Will the post-COVID model impact the Indian subcon? Over to you, Julian.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Good morning, everybody. No, I don't need that. It's okay, relax. You'll be relieved to know that I don't have a presentation, unlike just about everybody else who's been up here in the last day and a half. So you don't have to look at anything, and if you want to have a quiet sleep or close your eyes, you're welcome. In fact, it may well be a good idea, but anyway. Before I get into the key points that I want to make, firstly, I must just say that I'm really grateful to the organisers of this conference for having invited me to participate. I've had the privilege of visiting this country many, many times over the years, and there's been a bit of a long gap because of COVID and all that stuff. So to be able to come back and to participate in a dialogue like this is a great privilege. So Rohan, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciated. I think the second point I'd make is that I do, and I think all of us in the room, owe a debt of gratitude to people like Rohan and also Ravi in India, Ramprasad, for organising conferences like this. As I will touch on, many of the issues that I'm going to talk about are collective issues. They're not something that industry alone or the regulators alone or government alone or ports alone or whoever it is have to deal with. They are issues for everybody. And if everybody's going to deal with them properly, then there has to be an effective dialogue. And one way in which that dialogue can be facilitated is through conferences like this. Again, as I said, I think we owe Rohan and Ramprasad a real debt of gratitude for what they're doing for the industry in organising conferences like this, so thanks very much. The script that I was set today was, as Tanya said, to talk about ship sizes and will the post-COVID model impact the ISC ports. I have to say I'm not terribly sure that anybody knows what the post-COVID model is yet, because we're not really out of COVID, at least certainly people in China don't think we are. Boris Johnson certainly likes to think that we are, but I think opinions vary. So what I thought I'd try and do, instead of talking about all this just in terms of sort of post-COVID, what I'd do is try and highlight some of the main policy levers I think that regulators, governments and industry need to be thinking of if they are going to develop an effective logistics industry, an effective ports industry across the ISC. And there are sort of 7 or 8 quick points that I'd make, and then I'll stop. And then, obviously, you know, there's an opportunity for people to disagree and say that they think what I've been saying is either right or wrong. The first point I'd make is that this is a collective issue. I've already said that, and I will keep saying it, and I will keep trying to use the word we. It's terribly easy for the industry to say, oh, it's government's responsibility, or it's very easy for government to say it's the industry's responsibility, or somewhere in between. It's not. It's our responsibility to get all this right, and therefore we have to think about, as industry leaders, how we are going to facilitate a proper dialogue between the various parts of the industry. And as I said, a conference like this is a key part of that process. The second point I'd make is that it really needs to be clear, as far as government is concerned, and industry has to play a large part in this, that logistics are a key pillar of a government's economic planning policy. If you look around the world, you can see that those countries that have effective, open efficient logistics sectors generally prosper. Those that don't, where government has not paid enough attention, generally pay a price for that. When I first came to this part of the world, it was very obvious that in much of South Asia, logistics really didn't feature at all. Now, I think that's changing. We've got a long way to go, and it's changing at different rates. But it is changing, but we've still got more to do. The third point I'd make is that when we're talking about ports and infrastructure, this is not just about physical infrastructure. So many people still talk about ports in terms of roads and rail and crane and steel and concrete and heaven knows what. It's as much as anything about the regulatory infrastructure. Governments, and this needs to be driven by industry as well, need to take on board that if the infrastructure is going to be provided in the right way, then that the regulatory environment needs to be right. And that's a big task. I think the next point I'd make is that ports cannot be seen as being standalone. Again, policymakers, perhaps driven by industry, have tended to see ports just as ports. They've completely forgotten about the fact that there is a land side as well. That's changing now in India. Look at the developments around the dedicated freight corridor, the road networks, and other facilities, both regulatory and physical, which are being built to support the ports. But we live in an age of through transportation. It's no good building one bit of the network without the supporting bits that go with it. Whatever one does in all of this, I think regulation should be absolutely at the minimum. It always seems to me that governments love to fiddle about with industries, whatever they are, particularly the logistics industry. My personal view is that we should simply allow one regulator, and that's the market. And try and achieve a situation where governments only intervene where there is a real crying need for them to do so, rather than what happens at the moment, which is the sort of starting point is, oh, the government has to manage this. Government's position, government's role, at least in my view, is to be the facilitator, not the manager of any industry, whether it's running transport or making toothbrushes or whatever. And we really need to change and move to that and stop a situation where government keeps interfering. Pork pricing in India is a classic example where we still haven't got rid of, finally, the role of government in trying to tell the port operators what to charge. Next quick point is scale. And this is about ship size, obviously. I know this is a subject which everybody loves to debate all the time. I think inexorably ship sizes that are being handled in India are going to continue to rise because that derives, or that generates economies of scale for the operators, and that inevitably flows through into the marketplace. I know that line is not always the easiest to draw, but it is there without question. The second point is that if South Asia wishes to be part of a global network, it has to have the facilities to be able to handle the units or the assets which are operating in those global networks, namely large vessels. So we have to see and work with government to find ways to create a bigger, more capable infrastructure. Silas has talked already about electronic e-business. He's done so with great eloquence and far more, in far greater detail than I can manage. But I think it is a point which needs to be a central part of government policy to achieve greater transparency, to achieve greater efficiency, but it mustn't be looked at just in terms of the domestic market. We're all part of one market, the global market. Data flows around the world. There are now networks which need to be in place which link not just within India or Sri Lanka or Bangladesh, but they need to link right the way across the globe so that people can see data as it's building up in other parts of the world and cargo is moving towards them. 3 quick final points, then I'll shut up. We need to privatize as much as possible. As I said already, government's role is not to run businesses, it's to facilitate, and it should get out of business and leave it to business to run itself. So privatize everything. I know some people will say that's heresy, but certainly that's my view, and I think it works. You get some bangs and crashes on the way, and not all privatisation of logistics networks. Look at British Rail in the UK, is not the greatest privatisation, but I think the direction is right. Second to last point is about cost efficiency. Silesh talked about the relative cost of logistics in India at around about 14% in GDP. You know, one can have a lovely time arguing whether it's 15 or 14 or 13%. I think the real point is that there is a big difference between the cost of logistics in South Asia and our competitors. If our competitors' cost of logistics is comparatively lower, whether it's 14 or 8 or whatever it is irrelevant. The point is there's a disparity which makes us here in South Asia less competitive. And the last point I'd make is safety. I don't think anybody's mentioned this word at all in this conference. It is a sad fact that the logistics sector across South Asia injures and indeed sadly kills a lot of people, either directly by running them over or trucks driving into each other or through pollution. Between all of us, we need to do something about it because it does have a huge economic cost, and as responsible people, hopefully, we can't allow all that to continue. Generally speaking, I hope that gives an idea of what I think are some of the major policy areas that we should be looking at. Some of them I know are a bit obvious, but in my experience, it's very often the obvious things that get forgotten. I've missed out some, I know, but we could talk about that in the short time that remains left to us. So once again, thank you all very much indeed for your attention. Thank you for being here, and thank you for giving me the privilege of being here today and allowing me to speak. Thank you all very much indeed.